Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our reading Among the Hidden. So, where we left off, or what we know right now, Luke is a third child living in a world where third children aren't allowed. He lives on his family's farm, and they were surrounded by forests, so he couldn't really go outside, but he could go outside a little bit because he was protected, but the woods kind of protected him from anyone being able to see him, and he could go out to the barn and help raise their families crops and pigs and whatnot because he could move about enough that he wasn't seen. The government, though, has come and they have forced the family to buy their or sell their property, and then they've put in new homes, and they find out these homes are going to be owned by barons, which are very rich people. Because of that, their property taxes have gone up, and also the barons don't want to smell pigs, which is what their family raises, so they have to sell them. And that money that they sold their hogs for, they were like, oh, well, this will help us get by for a while. But because their property taxes went up because of these new houses, there goes all that money. So his mom's had to go back to work. He doesn't really have anyone there. He's kind of isolated from his family, and it's kind of a rough situation he's living in. I mean, he's living in the attic. He's not really able to come out, and he has no windows except for a vent that his parents don't really know he can see out of. And where we left off, he was watching the houses and saw a face where two boys and family live, and he saw them leave that morning. So, what does that mean? We're going to find out. We're on chapter 9. Luke was so surprised. He lost his balance and almost fell backwards off the trunk. By the time he recovered and righted himself, the face was gone. Had he imagined it? Was it just one of the sports family brothers home early from school? Kids got sick, like Dad said, or they decided to play hooky. Luke tried to remember every detail of the face he'd seen, or thought he'd seen. It had been younger than either of the sports family brothers. Softer, hadn't it? Maybe it was a thief, or a maid come early. No, it had been a child. He didn't even let himself think what another child in that house would be. He stared for hours at the sports family's house, but no face reappeared. Nothing happened until 6 when the two sports family boys drove in their Jeeps, unloaded their football gear, and carried it into the house. They didn't run out screaming about being robbed, and he'd seen no thief leave. He'd seen no maid leave. At 6:30, Luke reluctantly climbed down from his perch when he heard his mother's knock on the door. He sat down on his bed and muttered a distracted, "Come in." She rushed to hug him. "Luke, I'm so sorry. I know you were just trying to help, and everything is amazingly clean. I'd love it if you could do this every day. But your father thinks, you can't." Luke was so busy thinking about the face in the window that at first he couldn't figure out what she was talking about. Oh, the bread, the house cleaning, the radio. "That's okay," Luke mumbled. But it wasn't, and it never would be. His anger came back. Why did his parents have to be so careful? Why didn't they just lock him out in one of the trunks in the attic and be done with it? "Can't you talk to him?" Luke asked. "Can't you convince him?" Mother pushed Luke's hair back from his face. "I'll try," she said, "but he's just trying to protect you. We can't take any chances." Even if the face in the window of the sports family house was another third child, so what? Luke and the other kid could live right next door all their lives and never meet. Luke might never yet see another kid again, and he'd certainly never see Luke. Luke lowered his head. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked. "There's nothing for me to do. Am I supposed to just sit in this room the rest of my life?" Mother was stroking his hair now. It made him feel itchy and irritable. "Oh, Lukey," she said, "you can do so much. Read and play and sleep whenever you want. Believe me, I'd like to live a day of your life right about now." "No, you wouldn't," Luke muttered. But he said it so softly he was sure Mother couldn't hear. He knew she wouldn't understand. If there was a third child in the sports family, would he understand? Would he feel the way Luke did? Chapter 10. When Luke went down to supper, he saw that Mother had set his 2 loaves of bread out on the china plate she used for holidays and special occasions. She was showing off the bread the way she used to tape up the crooked drawings Matthew and Mark brought home from school when they were little. But something had gone wrong. Maybe Luke hadn't used enough yeast, or he'd kneaded the dough too much or too little, and the loaves had turned out flat. They looked like lopsided and pathetic in the center of the table. Luke wished Mother had just thrown them away. It's cold out now. Nobody'd notice if you pulled the shades. Why can't I sit at the table with all of you? He asked when he reached the bottom of the stairs. Oh, Luke, Mother started. Someone might see your shadow through the shade, Dad said. But they wouldn't know it was mine, Luke said. But there'd be 5. Someone might get suspicious, Mother said patiently. Luke, we're just trying to protect you. How about a big slice of your bread? There's cold beef and canned beans, too. Resignedly, Luke sat down on the stairs. Matthew asked about the auction Dad had gone to. I drove all that way for nothing, Dad said disgustedly. I waited 4 hours for the tractors to come up, and then I couldn't even afford the first bid. At least you got home in time to fix that back fence before dark, Mother said, cutting the bread. And yell at me, Luke thought bitterly. What was wrong with him? Nothing had changed, except he'd maybe seen a face that had belonged to someone like him. Matthew and Mark suddenly noticed the bread Mother was doling out. What's wrong with that? Mark said. I'm sure it'll taste fine, Mother said. It's Luke's first try. Luke muttered, and my last, too softly for anyone to hear. There were advantages to sitting on the other side of the room from everyone else. Luke made bread, Mark said incredulously. Yuck. Yeah, and I put special poison in one of the loaves that only affects 14-year-olds, Luke said. He pantomimed death, clutching his hands around his own neck, letting his tongue hang out of his mouth and lolling his head to the side. If you're nice to me, I'll tell you which loaf is safe. That shut Mark up, but earned Luke a frown from Mother. Luke felt strange about the joke anyways. Of course he'd never poison anyone, but if something happened to Matthew or Mark, would Luke have to hide anymore? Would he become the public's second son, free to go to town and school and everywhere else that Matthew and Mark went? Could his parents find some way to explain a new child already 12 years old? It wasn't something Luke could ask. He felt guilty just thinking about it. Mark was making a big ceremony out of bringing the bread to his mouth. I'm not scared of you, he taunted and took a big bite. He swallowed with great difficulty and pretended to gag. Water! Water! Quick! He gulped down half his glass and stared at Luke. Tastes like poison, all right. Luke bit into his bread. It was dry and crumbly and tasteless, not like Mother's at all, and everybody knew it. Even Dad and Mother had pained expressions on their faces as they chewed. Dad finally pushed his slice away. That's okay, Luke, he said. I'm not sure I'd want any son of mine getting too good at baking anyhow. That's what a man gets married for. Matthew and Mark guffawed. Getting married soon, Luke? Mark teased. Sure, Luke said, struggling to sound as devil-may-care as Mark. But I don't think I'd invite you to the wedding. He felt a cold, hard lump in his stomach that wasn't the bread. Of course he'd never get married. Or do anything. He'd never leave the house. Mark switched to teasing Matthew, who evidently did have a girlfriend. Luke watched the rest of his family laughing. May I be excused? Luke asked. Everyone turned to him in surprise. Usually he was the last one to make that request. Mother often begged Matthew and Mark, can't you just wait and talk to Luke a little bit longer? Done already? Mother asked. I'm not very hungry, Luke said. Mother gave him a worried look, but nodded anyway. Luke went to his room and climbed onto the stool by the back fence. In the dark, it was easier than ever to see into the houses of the new neighborhood. Their windows were lit up against the night. Some families were eating like his. He could see one set of 4 people around a dining room table and one set of 3. Some families had their curtains or shades drawn, but sometimes the material was thin and he could see shadows of the people inside. Only the sports family had all of their windows totally blocked, covered by heavy blinds. Chapter 11. Luke watched the sports family house constantly after that. Before, he just looked out the back fence in the early morning and late afternoon, when he knew people were about, but he'd seen the face at 2 o'clock. Maybe the other kid knew the rhythms of the neighborhood too and let his guard down only during the times he considered safe. For 3 long days, Luke saw nothing. Then, on the fourth day, he was rewarded. One panel of one of the blinds on an upstairs window flipped quickly up and down at 11 o'clock. The seventh day, the blinds in a downstairs window were left up in the morning. Luke saw a light go on and off at 9:07, 2 full hours after the last of the sports family had left. A half hour later, the sports family mother drove him in her red car and snapped into the house. 2 minutes later, the blind in the downstairs window went down. The mother left immediately. The 13th day was unseasonably warm, and Luke sweated in his attic. Some of the sports family windows were left open, though still covered by the blinds. The wind blew the blinds back a couple of times. Luke saw lights on in some of the rooms some of the time, in other rooms as the day wore on. Once he even thought he saw the glow of a TV screen. He had no doubts anymore. Someone was hiding in the sports family house. The question was, what could he do about it? Chapter 12. Harvest came. Matthew and Mark stayed out of school to help Dad bring the crops in, the three of them working some days from dawn until midnight. Mother's factory got busier too, and she began working 2 or 3 hours of overtime every day. She brought up a store of food to Luke's room so he wouldn't get hungry while they were all away. "There," she said cheerfully, lining up boxes of crackers and bags of fruits. "This way you won't even miss us." Her eyes begged him not to complain. "Uh-huh," he said, trying to sound game. "I'll be fine." He watched the sports family house only sporadically now. What other proof did he need? What good did it do him to know about the other third child? What did he expect? That the other kid would run out in his backyard and yell, "Hey, Luke, come out and play!" He munched his solitary apples. He ate his crackers alone. And in spite of himself, a crazy idea grew in his mind, sprouting new details daily. What if he sneaked into the sports family house and met the other third child? He could do it. It was possible, theoretically. He spent entire days plotting his route. He'd been hidden by bushes in the barn through much of the yard. It was only about 6 feet from there to the nearest tree in the sports family backyard. He could crawl on his stomach. Then he'd be hidden by the fence the sports family shared with the bird brain family. All those birdhouses might actually help. After that, it was only 3 steps to the sports family house. They had a sliding glass door at the back, and on warm days, they'd been leaving it open with just a screen. He could go in there. Would he dare? Of course he wouldn't. But still. The first time he looked out the vents and saw maple leaves shot through with spades of red and yellow, he panicked. He needed those leaves to hide him on the way to the sports family house. If he waited too long, the leaves would be gone. He began waking up every morning in a cold sweat, thinking, maybe today. Do I dare? Just thinking about it made his stomach feel funny. It rained 3 days in a row in early October, and he was almost relieved because that meant he couldn't go on those days. Didn't even have to think about going. He couldn't risk leaving footprints in the mud. And Dad and Matthew and Mark were in the way, hanging around the house and the barn, grumbling because they couldn't get into the fields. Finally, the rain stopped and the fields dried up, and Dad and Matthew and Mark went back to their combine and tractors, acres away from the house. The backyard and the sports family backyard were dry too. And it was warm again. The sports family left their sliding glass door open. The rain hadn't knocked all the leaves off the backyard trees, but the next rain probably would. On the third morning after the rain, Luke's stomach churned as he sat on his perch, watching the neighborhood empty out. He knew without question that today was the day he'd have to go if he ever intended to. He couldn't wait until spring. He wouldn't be able to stand it. He watched 28 people leave in 8 cars and 1 school bus. Hands trembling, he made scratches on the wall again and recounted once, twice, 3 times. 28. Yes, 28. Yes, 28. The magic number. He could hear the blood pounding in his ears. He moved in a daze, off his perch, down the stairs, into the kitchen, and then out the back door. This would be a great place to stop, but I usually do try and read for at least 15 minutes, so we'll keep going. Chapter 13. He had forgotten what fresh air felt like, filling his nostrils and lungs. It felt good. With his back pressed against the house, he stood still for a moment, just breathing. All the months he'd spent inside suddenly seemed like a dream. He'd been like some confused animal, hibernating during nice weather. The last real thing that had happened to him was being called inside when the woods were coming down. Real life was outdoors. But so was danger. Down into a crouch and half crawled, half ran alongside the house and the hedges in the barn. At the back edge of the barn, he hesitated, staring into the seemingly endless gulf between the barn and the trees at the boundary between his backyard and the sports family's. Everybody's gone, he told himself. There's not a soul around to see you. Still, he waited, staring at the blades of grass just beyond his feet. He'd been taught all of his life to fear open spaces like the one in front of him. It faced dozens of windows. He'd never stepped foot in any place that public, even if it was deserted. Still hidden by the barn, he made himself inch his foot forward, then drew it back. He turned around and looked at his family's house, so safe and secure, his sanctuary. He heard his mother's voice in his head, "Luke! Inside! Now!" It seemed so real. He remembered something he read in one of the old books in the attic about telepathy. Supposedly, if people really loved you, they could call out to you from miles away if you were in danger. He should go back. He'd be safe there. He took a deep breath, looking forward toward the sports family house, then back again towards his own. He thought about returning home, trudging up the worn stairs, going back to his familiar room and the walls he had stared at every day. Suddenly, he hated his house. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a prison. Before he had time to think again, he pushed himself off into a sprint, recklessly streaking across the grass. He didn't even stop to hide at any trees. He ran to the sports family door and tugged at the screen. It was locked. And now my timer has buzzed, so we will see what happens next time. Have a great day, guys.